Arrakis, Dune, Desert Planet. Welcome fellow members of the Esoteric Order of Gamers. Today I'm going to look at Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy by Gale Force 9. Gale Force 9 were kind enough to send me a copy of the new game, Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy for me to check out and tell you all about. Now, this is based on the classic Dune game, originally by Avalon Hill, re-released by Gale Force 9 recently. But it's a little bit different. It plays really well with two players. It's shorter and faster. They've taken out the diplomacy. It's really just a game of conquest. But I'm going to skip right to the end now and tell you that this is a lot of fun. It's short and it's fast and it's interesting, and I really enjoy playing it. Some of you classic Dune players may be a bit disappointed that it isn't longer and meatier, but there's a lot to enjoy here anyway. Let's get into it. I'll tell you all about it. But first, a little historical context. This is the original game of Dune, released in 1979, and a bit of a classic. It had a 6-player setup. You could see all the different players were here. You had the Harkonnens, the Traitors, the Bene Gesserit, the Fremen, the Guild, and the Emperor. All those 6 factions. And the whole idea of this game was a whole lot of diplomacy and deal-making, as well as the basic mechanics of the game. Way back in my early teens when I first started playing board games, and actually I don't think people realise how few board games there were available back then, or interesting strategic type board games anyway. Way back then I played a game called Diplomacy with some friends of mine. We were playing the 1976 Avalon Hill edition, and it was one of the worst experiences I ever had playing a board game. And that's because the diplomacy rules in that game are very vague and open. You can do all kinds of deals with the other players in the game. So we spent an afternoon playing this game, and people would run off to other rooms and do little deals and then come back to the table and execute those deals and betray other players and do all that kind of thing. This was kind of a staple of early strategic board games, as you could do this kind of free-form diplomacy between players and make deals and betray them and stuff like that. It's not something that appealed to me at all. I like to have a framework in which you play the game, because some people are really good at deal-making and betrayal and diplomacy and backstabbing and all that stuff, and some people are rotten at it. And the people who are bad at it end up having a pretty miserable time. Now, Dune, because it's kind of that vintage, has a lot of that in it as well, and a lot of people will say that's what makes the game really, really good. Personally, to me, I don't really like that type of gameplay because, as I said, it makes you feel a bit bad if you're not good at that kind of deal-making and backstabbing. So everyone has always said that Dune plays the best with 6 players because there's so much of that deal-making going on. So I've never actually got around to playing it because I never got 6 like-minded players together to play an old game like Dune. Now, in 2012, Fantasy Flight Games created a game called Rex, Last Days of an Empire, which basically was the rules of Dune except set in their Twilight Imperium universe. And the reason they did this is because the Frank Herbert estate, Frank Herbert being the author of Dune, wasn't giving out the permission for the license to anybody else, and they had that stance for a long, long time. It's only with the release of the new Denis Villeneuve film that the estate has really opened up, and there's been a flood of Dune games on the market. So Gale Force 9 came up with a revamped version of Dune in 2019. I don't have a copy because, again, 6 players, probably wasn't going to play it. And that brings us to 2021 when we've got this one, and this is, as you can see, themed with the Denis Villeneuve film. We've got images of the actors from the film, and it's very much in that style. The great thing about this version, however, is that finally I can play it with a couple of players. You can play it up to 4 with this set. I wonder if they're going to have expansions. They probably will. But certainly with this one you can play up to 4, and you can play with 2. And I've played this with 2 players 3 times now and loved it. So with that little historical context, let's get back to telling you about this version of Dune. And here we are set up for a 2-player game. And the great thing is that we are set up for a 2-player game, because Dune is not a game that you could have played with 2 players very successfully in the past. Here, two players are playing one faction each. I've got the Traitors here and the Harkonnens over here, but you can actually play it with two factions each. In fact, there are special faction cards to set it up that way. Over here, we've got some decks. The Traitor deck, the Market deck, the Spice deck, and the Battle deck. And the interesting thing here is the Market deck, which is a new addition and actually changes the game quite a lot and adds a lot of interest and randomness to the proceedings. You still have the classic combat wheels, which is a feature of the original game. You can put your leader token in this space here, and you can set the number of forces you want to fight. But I'm getting ahead of myself. How does Dune play? Well, each faction has a special ability, a number of leaders, a number of forces, and a starting amount of spice. I won't go into the background of Dune. I'm sure you know all about it. It's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it already, immediately go read it. Read it before you have seen the film. You won't regret it. It's a great book. You also get to choose one traitor card out of a hand of 4 at the start of the turn. Now, this traitor may be one of your own leaders, in which case you know that they're loyal, or it may be one belonging to your opponent's faction, in which case they're a traitor. So you can call them out as a traitor in the middle of a combat. Here we have the map of Dune, and it's divided into sand areas. These are rocky areas. You've got a number of strongholds which you're trying to hold during the game around here, and with a 2-player game you'll randomly close one of those off so it won't apply during the game. You've also got a storm which circles the board during the game. There's a turn marker over here. Yes, the game is only 5 turns, so it's over very quickly. And then you have the phases of the turn nicely marked out here if you want to keep track of them. So let's very quickly go through the phases of a turn just so you get an overview of play. First off, you have a storm phase, and you've got a storm dice here. You roll that dice and the storm on the edge of the board moves around that many spaces counterclockwise around the board. The whole board is divided into segments, so it travels a number of segments equal to the result on the dice. Now, the storm is very, very important. It's almost like another player which is getting in your way during the whole game. Because if the storm passes over or ends in an area where you have troops, those troops are destroyed. Now, when troops and leaders get destroyed in this game, they go to the Talaxu tanks, which is a space on the board, and they can come back in a bit later. But still, it can be quite devastating. It also destroys any spice on the map of Dune as it goes past. So you really have to keep an eye out where the storm is and where it's going to go. The next phase is Spice Blow, and in this one you draw a spice card from the deck. It'll show 2 areas in which spice appears. So on this card we have 8 spice appearing in the Hugger Basin and 8 spice appearing on the Great Flat. So that goes onto the board. Next up, we've got the Gain Cards phase. You can draw up to 4 battle cards, and you can buy market cards at a cost of 2 spice each. And market cards can be quite powerful, so it's good to have a few in hand. Next up, the Revival phase. If you do have any leaders or troops in the Talaxu tanks, I don't know exactly how you pronounce it, you can get them back on the board. You get 2 troops back for free, but if you pay additional spice, you can get additional forces and leaders back. Next, shipping and movement, and this is where things really heat up, because you can send your forces down to the planet to take territories. For 1 spice per troop, you can send a number of troops down to the planet into one area, and they can go straight into a stronghold if you want to. And because you're trying to capture strongholds, this is very powerful. They can also go down into areas to capture spice. After you've shipped down a number of forces, they can move up to 3 territories on the map. Next, you have the battle phase, and if 2 or more forces are in the same territory, they're going to fight. We'll get into that a little bit later. Finally, we come to the spice collection phase. If you're in the same territory as spice, you can collect that spice. Normally, 1 troop can collect 2 spice. And that's it. That's a turn. Now, there's only 5 turns, so things are going to happen pretty quickly. Now, of course, the most important thing in this game is conquest. Not diplomacy, conquest. So let's look at how the battle phase works. Now, this incredibly brilliant combat system is the same as it was back in 1979, and it's amazing that it hasn't been stolen by more games. It just works so well. You have this battle dial, which has got a number on here. Now, you can commit a number of forces to the dial or to the battle, up to the number of forces you have in the territory where you're fighting. Now the thing is that all the forces that you commit to this dial will die. You will lose them. So it's a very big decision deciding how many forces you put on this dial. But let's say we have 6 forces in an area and we decide to commit 4 to this battle. So we dial it up to 4. Then, secretly, we choose one of our leaders and we put it on the little space on the dial, and they're going to add their combat value to the battle as well. If you're able to, you must commit a leader to the battle. Now, if you've committed a leader, you can also commit battle cards to the battle, and they come in 2 main types, weapons and defense. So you can choose a particular type of weapon and a particular type of defense, and you hold it behind your dial like this, and then you chuckle evilly at your opponent until eventually you reveal them at the same time. Now, in most cases, the battle cards refer to the battle between the leaders. So you may have a weapon that can kill your opponent's leader, but your opponent might have a particular defense card which defends against that type of attack. So the reveal of weapon and defense cards is a great part of the game. You may have your leader killed, in which case you only have the number on the top of your dial to fight with. Of course, the highest number wins. But wait, there's more. There's traitors. If you happen to have the card that corresponds to your opponent's leader, you can call out a traitor and immediately win the combat. It's devastating, it's fun, it's a fantastic part of the game. The other thing that shakes up all this basic gameplay, of course, is the deck of new market cards, and they have a whole range of special abilities and effects that happen during various phases of the game. So you can more easily claim spice with less troops. You can get advantages in combat. You can control the movement of the storm around the board. You can eliminate spice in a particular territory. You can move your forces greater distances on the board. The market cards are fantastic and they really shake up the game. And don't forget, all the factions have special abilities that make them feel distinctive. Finally, you win a game of Dune by controlling 3 strongholds at the end of any turn from turn 3 onward, or at the end of turn 5, controlling the most spice. Now, before I tell you what I think of Dune, let me stress once again that these reviews are just my personal opinion. I don't pretend to be objective in any way, and I haven't played Dune hundreds of times, so I can tell you all the different things that can happen. But I really enjoy it. And as I said, I've only played it with 2 players. It also plays with 4, which I can only imagine would be even more fun. Also, you can play it in that 2-player mode where you have 2 factions each, which sounds really interesting. When you're just playing with 2 players, however, which at the moment is really the bulk of my gaming, I'm doing a lot of 2-player gaming lately, Dune is just excellent. There are so many wonderful choices packed into a short time frame here. It's only about 45 minutes long. It looks like there's a lot to do in each turn, but actually it just flies by. And really, you can suddenly turn around and think, oh, it's like turn 3 or 4, and think, I can't believe this game is about to end. And then in those last couple of turns, suddenly everything gets really serious and your decisions have a huge amount of impact on whether you're going to win the game or not. So for me, it hits this fantastic sweet spot of being a really kind of thoughtful, chunky kind of game that can be played in a short period of time. And it's remarkable how few games I have that fit that sweet spot. So many times we have a gaming night and there's about an hour left to go before the night is over, and we just want to fit one more game in. And usually it's something really short and fun. This one we can actually bring out and have a meaty little game in about 45 minutes. Deciding where to move your troops down onto the planet, which amounts of spice you grab, keeping an eye out for the storm so it doesn't destroy the spice and your troops, and also always keeping an eye on your opponent to make sure they don't grab those 3 strongholds to win. No one can win in the first 2 turns of the game, but from turn 3 onwards, if you've grabbed 3 strongholds, you win. So the game could be over like that. You really have to keep an eye on things. While you're concentrating on what you're doing, suddenly you could find that your opponent has grabbed those strongholds or got themselves in a position where they have too many troops in a stronghold and you're not strong enough to get them out. Of course, as I mentioned, the combat system is always great fun. There's that bluffing, there's picking the right cards to kill your opponent's leader, hoping that they're not going to have the right cards to kill your leader. Always got that choice about the weapon cards and the defense cards, which is a lot of fun. And then, of course, it's shaken up by the fact that you don't know if your opponent has your leader as a traitor, so they could suddenly just win completely by exposing the traitor card. So much going on in such a simple combat system. You're not adding up modifiers, you're not mucking around with unnecessary complexity. It's just highest number wins. But if your leader gets taken out, you're probably going to lose. But also you've got to sacrifice a number of troops to get that win as well. So that really shakes up what's going to happen next. It's absolutely brilliant. Such a great little combat system, and it really elevates that part of the game to almost a little mini game. Of course, as I said, all of the diplomacy stuff has been taken out, which is why, again, it's strange that they call it a game of conquest and diplomacy. What's replaced the diplomacy is the market card deck, which has enough interesting things in it to kind of replace that human element that came from people making deals and doing backstabbing. It's very satisfying to be in a position to take some spice or to take a stronghold, and your player thinking you're not going to do it because the storm is about to hit, and then of course just at the start of the storm phase you reveal that market card that says you can control the storm, and you can actually move it naught spaces if you want to. There's a lot of glee in playing those cards at just the right time. Production-wise, Dune looks nice. I think there's a real market here for a premium edition of this game. I think I'll be playing it for a long time to come, and I'd just like to see better quality all around, and I'd be willing to pay for it. I'd like to see wooden pieces, something like they had in Dune Imperium, for example, instead of just the little cardboard counters. And there's a few design decisions here that I'm not absolutely crazy about. Putting the name of components on them is kind of unnecessary. Putting Storm on the Storm component, writing Battle Wheel on the dials, things like that are just not necessary, and I just think get in the way of it being an attractive product. The cards themselves are a little bit underwhelming design-wise, and also they're a bit thin. They've got a varnish linen texture on it, but it's just a fake kind of texture. I hate being critical of other graphic designers' work, of course, but since I'm a graphic designer, I think I should put my opinion out there. I think the typography could be a little bit better as well. It's very, very straight. The card design, a little bit bland. I think the overall product looks nice. It just feels like it could be another notch up quality-wise. And I very much recommend putting all your cards in sleeves because they're very dark. There's a lot of ink on the card, so the edges might scrape off if you don't protect them immediately with sleeves. Also, I didn't find the plastic insert provided very useful. Once you've sleeved the cards, it doesn't all fit in comfortably. So I'll be making my own foam core insert later on. But again, this new version of Dune, though confusingly named, is really, really fun, and I think I'll be playing it a lot. As I said, it just hits that great spot for a short game with a lot of interesting decisions in it. There's a very limited amount of time here for you to come up with a strategy and to win. Luck is always going to come along and make a difference. You never know exactly what's going on with your opponent's cards in the combats. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but it makes it a very enjoyable game, and it's just over so quickly. The strange thing about Dune is that one of the good things about it is that it's very short, and yet that's one of the frustrating things because it's so enjoyable you want it to last longer. Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoy the work of the Esoteric Order of Gamers, don't forget to sign up to all my social media, check out the Patreon channel if you want to support me, and of course go to the website because there will be a rules summary and reference by me available for this game, and there's about almost 400 other ones available on the website that you can download, print out, laminate and enjoy. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.